It's a funny feeling being took under the wing of a dragon. It's warmer than you think.
That's the building of our country right there, Mr. Cutting. Americans are borning.
I don't see no Americans. I see trespassers. Irish hops do a job for a nickel what a nigger does for a dime and a white man used to get a quarter for. What have they done? Name one thing they've contributed. Votes. Votes, you say? They vote how the Archbishop tells them, and who tells the Archbishop? Their king in the pointy hat what sits on his throne in Rome.
Bill's got mixed feelings as regards the Irish.
Bill, deliver these good and fervent folk to the polls on a regular basis, and there'll be a handsome price for each vote goes Tammany's way.
My father gave his life making this country what it is. Murdered by the British with all of his men on the 25th of July, Anno Domini 1814. You think I'm gonna help you befoul his legacy? By giving this country over to them was had no hand in the fighting for it? Why, because they come off a boat crawling with lice and begging you for soup?
You're a great one for the fighting, Bill, I know. But you can't fight forever.
I can go down doing it.
And you will.
What did you say?
I said you're turning your back on the future.
Not our future.
That document makes you a citizen. This one makes you a private in the Union Army. Now go fight for your country. Next. Sign here, sir. Or make your mark.
Our fortunes to be made. We were thinking when we got to Yankee land, shoved a gun into our hands, saying, Paddy, you must go and fight for Lincoln.
There's your musket. Make sure you keep it dry on the boat. Same for the cartridge case.
Where are we going?
I heard Tennessee.
Where's that?
There is nothing here but war, where the murdering cannons roar. And I wish I was at home in dear old Dublin.
Do they feed us now, do you think?
My children, we must heal the divisions between us. This war must cease. North and South must stand united.
What happens at the finish then?
Then we have ourselves a rowdy down. Ain't you never been to the theater before?
Huh?
Mr. Legree, lay down your whip. Miss Eliza, join hands with Mr. Shelby. And Topsy, dear little Topsy, cradle Uncle Tom's head.
Leave the nigger dead!
For the blood of the Irish, Bill, get down! Let's have a row! Somebody pop the butcher! Move!
Whose man are you? Speak smart and speak up.
Settle with Allah, Sonny.
What's he saying, boy?
I think he's making his peace with God.
The hell with that. He makes his peace with me. I'm hearing confession tonight, you mother-whoring Irish nigger. Whose man are you? We speak English in this country. Whose man are you? You see this knife? I'm gonna teach you to speak English with this fucking knife. Whose man are you? Whose man are you? Well, that didn't tell us very much. Fine waistcoat. Shame about it. I don't think it can be mended. Will I keep it as a souvenir? Where's Legree? Where's Mopsy? Jesus, let's continue. Intermission is over.
That was bloody Shakespearean.
What?
Do you know who Shakespeare was, Sonny? He was a fellow who wrote the King James Bible.
Mister, I don't know what in the hell you're
Oh, you got a murderous rage in you, and I like it. Oh, it's life. Boiling up inside of you is good. The priest and me, we lived by the same principles. It was only faith divided us. He gave me this, you know. That was the finest beating I ever took. My face was pulp. My guts was pierced. My ribs was all mashed up. When he came to finish me, I couldn't look him in the eye. He spared me because he wanted me to live in shame. This was a great man. Great man. So I cut out the eye that looked away. Sent it to him wrapped in blue paper. I would have cut them both out if I could have fought him blind. And I rose back up again with a full heart and buried him in his own blood.
well done.
He was the only man I ever killed worth remembering. I never had a son. Civilization is crumbling.
God bless you.
I wonder if Miss Everdeen could angle her rifle in some other direction. I wonder, Mr. Vallon, if you understand the true value of this sort of publicity. The Archbishop himself, shoulder to shoulder with half the Irish in the 5 Points. I'm offering my boy to form an alliance with you against Bill Cutting and his slate of nativist candidates. I'll negotiate a handsome fee for every Irish vote you send Tammany's way in the coming elections. I need a new friend in the 5 Points, son. I'd like that friend to be you.
Now, just a moment, Mr. Tweed. Suppose we do get you those votes. Would you back an Irish candidate of my choosing?
I don't think so.
What if we get you all the Irish votes?
Mr. Vallon, that will only happen in the reign of Queen Dick.
Beg your pardon?
That means it will never happen. Now, I might be persuaded to back an Irish candidate for, say, alderman.
Alderman.
We've already got Irish aldermen.
So we have. That's why.
What's bigger than alderman? Sheriff. Sheriff. Pardon, Mr. Tweed. You back an Irishman for sheriff of the city and county of New York, and we'll get him elected.
I love the Irish, son, but higher than alderman you shall never climb.
Why not?
For one thing, no man living can consolidate the Irish vote.
I can.
And for another, I mean no effrontery. No one's yet found an Irish candidate for sheriff worth voting for.
All right, everybody. Before we get started, we have a word from EasyRx. We talk constantly about health and different ways to help and get many questions about ivermectin and where to get it. That's why we've partnered with EasyRx. They have a huge selection of meds at badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx, or click in the description box below and use promo code Badlands for 10% off your order of $150 or more. EasyRx not only has a huge selection, but also quality assurance, big savings, and fast shipping. If you're looking for ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, fenbendazole, and more, then they are there today. Don't forget about fenbendazole. They've tested fenbendazole on worms and parasites that can live inside of us without obvious signs and can lead to health complications, from bowel obstruction to loss of appetite, loss of weight, anemia, lung infection, and liver congestion. Some people have stated that fenbendazole has even helped them with their cancer. Watch this clip of Joe Tippins and his fenbendazole story.
My liver, my pancreas, my bladder, in my bones, it was everywhere.
Joe Tippins says he was told to go home, call hospice, and say his goodbyes. The doctors were unanimous. He was going to die of small cell lung cancer.
Once that kind of cancer goes that far afield, the odds of survival are less than 1%, and the median life expectancy is 3 months.
Tippins says he got a tip, not from a pharmacist, but a veterinarian. And in his desperation, he turned from people medicine to dog medicine. Specifically, fenbendazole.
Truth is stranger than fiction, you know?
Just 3 months later, Tippins says his cancer was gone.
My insurance company spent $1.2 million on me with traditional means before I switched to a $5 a week medicine that actually saved me.
TV/EasyRx, promo code Badlands for 10% off your purchase of $150 or more. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Badlands Story Hour. I am Chris Paul. That is Burning Bright. And tonight we are discussing Gangs of New York, directed by Martin Scorsese, based on a book from 1928 by the same title, recounting the history of actual gangs in New York. And this is primarily a true story, which makes it all that much more interesting. And we're going to go through some of that history over the course of the next, 80 minutes. That is the first time I've ever watched that movie start to finish. And I was absolutely amazed in that first clip we played to start the show. That clip is like 7 minutes long, and there are like 4 massive red pills just right in that 7-minute clip.
Yeah.
All of which, if we said them online, we would be fact-checked and censored and called conspiracy theorists. But you can actually go back and check through the history and find out that this stuff happened. You can get the full record of it. And when you adjust for the total inversion within the false reality, this movie just comes out and just one after another refutes narratives that are not only pounded into our heads in our learning of history, but are replaying again now in real life. And we're called crazy for observing them in real life too.
Yeah, I was. This is the first time I've seen this movie as well. I've seen parts of it. I guess I dismissed it. I had said to Chris before the show, when I was younger, I was not a fan of period pieces. I was a fan of medieval period pieces, if you went way back. And then I liked modern stuff. I didn't like the in-between phases, the sort of colonial stuff, Civil War era in particular, were some of my least favorite stories. And I'd seen, scenes from this and just kind of wrote it off as that weird detour Scorsese did into like a, New York version of, Green Street Hooligans or something like that. Obviously, there's way more to it. This is one of the ones, we say this on a lot of shows, but really with this one, if you are not watching this with post-awakening eyes, you're not watching the same movie. And skipping to the not the coolest scene at the end, but the very, very end, which is like a little button, I think dovetails into what you just said there. I was left a few times in this movie feeling like this is one of the they're sort of laughing at us type of stories, like one of those at the very, very end when the various gang members are buried and you've got that hillside, you get the montage over the next century of the high rises going up in New York, and you've got DiCaprio's character Amsterdam saying it'll be like we were never here, after a generation or two, it'll be like we were never here. And it really, I joked in chat earlier that Bill the Butcher, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, is the hero of this. Obviously, there's no good people in this movie, but what I meant by that isn't so much hero, but more so if you watch this movie from the perspective of him having an accurate view of what is happening around him, he's sort of that anchoring center point. And the movie, including in that 7-minute clip that you played, basically throws everything possible it can at him and a lot of the movement that he's around to try to demonize it. And it's this same crap we see them throwing at Donald Trump and the MAGA America First movement today.
That's exactly right. And, I've spent a lot of the last few months going back through older writings because we have been lied to about our own history as much as we've been lied to about anyone else's. I think that a lot of people have had this realization over the past few years. If they hadn't understood this sort of thing throughout their lives, there are very rare people who were never brainwashed into any of this stuff and have just gotten it the entire time. But once you realize that the news that we are shown is fake, it is constant propaganda all the time. It is intended to deceive us about reality so that we will act in ways that support the power structure as it exists and allow them to acquire and amass and consolidate more power, more wealth, and of course, retain all the status so that their voice is the only respected voice there can be. Now, once you realize that that's happening in real time, you have to apply that to what they tell you will happen in the future. And then, of course, what has already happened in the past. We have to understand our world as it is now, understand the inversion and the process of these lies as they are disseminated, and then apply that to our understanding of history. And so I've often talked about this book that I've read called Our Secret Constitution by a communist law professor at Columbia University named George P. Fletcher. He talks about how the point of the Civil War, especially the later parts of the Civil War, were that Abraham Lincoln was leading an effort to overturn the Constitution and replace individual sovereignty with the good of the nation, replace the republic with a democracy, and focus on equality rather than liberty. That is
largely
a major,
succeeded. You could
Well, it 100
argue, right? History is
100%.
written by the winners, as they say.
100% succeeded, yes.
Yep.
They overturned the Constitution. They passed laws that weren't even properly ratified. They had to remove all the Confederate states from the process of ratification in order to get constitutional amendments passed. And people don't know that. And this is our history. Our Constitution, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really exist anymore. It has been replaced. And so there's that aspect to it. And you can go back and look at the slavery. You can go back and look at Abraham Lincoln's role in all of this, as if the Civil War was actually fought to rid the country of slavery. It's just not true. That is a fanciful notion. The idea that the North is good and the South is bad. All of these things are quickly refuted. Just watching this movie, it's easy to understand. And I'll pass this back to you in a second. But Bill the Butcher's character represents a party called the Know Nothings, that among the members were a man named Millard Fillmore. These were the people who were originally referred to as Native Americans. These were, I mean, it is shocking. And the idea that American natives getting mad at immigrants being brought over specifically to destroy them and steal their elections, that's supposed to be a bad thing that they're like the bad people for because they're racist. Oh my gosh, man. My mind was just blown the entire time.
Like the last just 20 seconds of what you said, there's so many conspiracy facts packed into what's going on here. I didn't know about the Know Nothings until Chris had told me that right before we went live here. But I did say right before the show that it's utterly insane to me. And, we talk about the InfoWars sometimes, or I frame it often like in a simple way. It's like puzzle pieces. We're all digging in different areas. We find a puzzle piece, and it's like, when you're digging under the couch and you find a puzzle piece, you might not even remember what it goes to. Maybe it's even from the previous owners, but you're holding a piece, right? You're holding a piece of a puzzle. Mm-hmm. It's not just some random thing that you found. We understand that the way the edges are shaped, it has been created intentionally. It fits in something. We just don't know what. Mm-hmm. And this movie has a lot of that. There's a lot of puzzle pieces that in the InfoWar, the Awakening era, you've probably collected on your way. And then in this, they start just fitting together if you're watching it with that kind of open-minded framing. The fact that this Know Nothing party was referred to as Native Americans is utterly fascinating to me and kind of mind-blowing, because we talk about history being written by the winners. That's a common saying. That's a saying that it's bipartisan, it's non-political, it's just a sort of self-evident truth of the human experience that people understand what is meant by that. Obviously, not just the winners of literal wars, but the winners of a paradigm war, the winners of wars of stories. The war of stories is not a new thing. All wars are ultimately about stories, and these words mean something, right? These labels mean something. So the fact that we had Native Americans in the 1800s were referring to the sons and daughters of American revolutionaries, meaning they were the first Native Americans in that context, that colonial context, is crazy to think about the modern connotation of the term Native American and how that is beaten into us through public education, Prussian Marxist education, funded directly by the Rockefellers. It doesn't mean that there were indigenous people, but the framing of them as Native American turns out is a new thing. It's not a thing that they were doing at this time, because Native American meant something completely different. That alone is enough to get you to flip your framing. And then one point about just, again, on framing here with Bill the Butcher, it's kind of interesting because this movie we don't know exactly what happened in this time period. Even when we're trying to dig into documentation, you're always looking at different perspectives. The closer you can get timeline-wise, probably the more interesting or accurate stories you're getting about that time period. You know, so when you're reading this book that's in 1928, you're closer to the accuracy than you are in 2028. But all of the events in this film could have happened, literally, factually. But it's amazing the framing of those events by the filmmakers and by the scriptwriters. So when you take Bill the Butcher, if you just changed his portrayal, if you changed how his personality comes off, if you didn't witness him engaged in such acts of violence and savagery throughout the movie, if he wasn't saying the N-word a bunch and all that, if you just track the plot rail of the character, it's one of those no lies detected things where you're sitting there, as you just said, and going, hold on, wait, this is the villain? Are you telling me that this is the villain? The guy who is in poverty that has been thrust onto them by the administrative state, which is represented pretty well in this movie. And he's against an illegal army coming in to kill his allies, friends, family, and countrymen, and he's the villain. And it's like, it's kind of amazing when we usually get, I think, more subtle subversion from the regime. Where in this one, they're basically just like, yeah, you're part of a dying breed, you're Native American colonialists, and it's time to wipe you out and usher in the new because you can't be controlled.
Yes, I'm on board with all of that. It's also worth noting that he called an Irishman the N-word, and we saw it in that clip.
Right.
And the word was not just for Black people.
Right.
And that's something that our culture is not prepared to accept in any way. That aside, the other crazy thing about Bill the Butcher here is that he is working with the Democrat power structure in New York City at Tammany Hall. Boss Tweed was a brutal and corrupt man. The elites that he was with that are featured in the kind of later scenes in the draft riots, these people control the city, and they're the globalists and the bankers that you were referring to. Prussians coming over. This is the influence of the regime as it controls the major city in America. And there was an alignment between New York City and the South during the Confederacy. We are just deceived about absolutely all of this. But Bill the Butcher, he's the native. He's protecting his territory. This is his zone down in 5 Points. And he understands that the political power structure is corrupt because he works with them. He's part of it. He has this kind of law-free zone where this is still about American liberty, people looking after themselves, dealing with their own business. Maybe their sense of justice isn't what it is in more refined elite societies, which only means more controlled societies. He doesn't trust these people to make decisions for him or to lead him or his people to war or even have the war in the first place. They're saying down with the Union. It's not because they care about preserving slavery. He even says in the film that he doesn't care about slavery at all.
Right.
That's not their issue. They don't want the American government to be killing Americans in mass on behalf of a foreign power using foreign soldiers that they have conscripted into their army to replace the Americans along with slaves, now freed slaves, who are going to fight also against American natives and people who just want the promises of that original Constitution that they can see being overturned in front of their eyes with a dictatorial presidency under Abraham Lincoln. It's crazy.
And that's the juxtaposition between the Irish in this movie and the freed slaves, the blacks in America, is pretty fascinating too, because it reminded me of sort of a conveyor belt where the story that was being told at that time, the political propaganda that won, basically, as we said at the beginning of the show, the story that essentially won in the American zeitgeist was that this was a battle to free the slaves. I grew up in the Boston area, walking around the Freedom Trail, and man, revisiting as an aside, one of the cool things about diving into real histories is you do get to see that a lot of those founding fathers were actually even more based than what we were told. They were just based in ways that we were not told they were based in, which is why there's a lot of retroactive character assassination done on them regarding racism and slavery and this and that. But we were obviously, especially growing up in New England, you're just baptized in this. We're the North, it's the Union, it's good versus bad. My hometown was like one of the pillars of the emancipation movement, and speeches in the park and all that kind of crap from what we're told about, right? And at this time, it's kind of interesting watching the portrayal, seeing that propaganda through the eyes of Native Americans, such as Bill the Butcher at the time. You get the impression that it's like us watching what they're doing now, right? Watching with the dreamers. That's what they call the people coming over the southern border right now. They can be Panamanian, they can be Colombian, they can be Mexican, they can be MS-13. They're dreamers, don't you know? They've just got the same dream as you, and they deserve all the same rights you do. That stings especially when you've got an actual legal immigrant that of a wife, so you know what that legal process looks like when you actually apply for all these things. But it's nothing new under the sun. When they bring the Irish in, it reminded me of that conveyor belt sort of thing, that the story they were using at the time was focused on the emancipation of Black Americans. So they were conscripting a lot of them, or they were getting them to volunteer to fight against the dastardly Southerners who wanted to keep them in chains. But they also couldn't go too whole hog into that with the blacks because they're supposed to be emancipating them, right? So they bring the Irish in and they're like, okay, you're the new blacks and you're going to fight the Southerners. And the Irish, at least, were doing it honestly, where they're coming over being like, yeah, we're just fighting for citizenship. That's what we're the dreamers right now. And we're going to kill these other Americans because, shit's gone off the rails already in this country, and we're going to take their land. We're going to kill them and take their land, basically.
So it mentions one of the reasons why the Irish are coming over in such numbers, and that's because of a famine. And, you know, we can watch the process by which a famine would happen in our modern day. There is absolutely no reason why anyone should be starving on this earth right now with modern agriculture and modern transportation. And this isn't some woke point where I want to make sure that we are feeding everybody. That's not the point. The point is we have the ability to make sure that never happens. When that does happen, it is specifically the result of policies put in place by this same global regime that has been operating for long before the events of this movie took place. So we can go look at the timeline and look at Irish famines. We understand that it's certainly not the Irish elites who were going hungry and needed to leave Ireland because there was just no food in Ireland. We have a bad crop and we have a potato blight, so we just can't eat anymore. These are events that are caused by the regime. We can see those kinds of events happening in the real world right now. They devastate countries all across the world in the populations of countries who will not go along with the plan. And we see this in African nations right now. They need to exploit these African nations for their minerals, their resources. They find corrupt leaders who are willing to go along and implement the plan. Anybody who doesn't want to be involved with that, well, those people can burn. We're going to devastate their communities. We're going to leave them all in abject poverty. And then we're going to send NGOs in that are going to save them by taking them out of their homes and transporting them across the country to below our southern border, where they'll be transferred to other NGOs who will transfer them to cartels that'll take them to the border, transfer them to other NGOs, blah, blah, blah. This is how the slave trade operates. This is how it operated back then, too. They're devastating different areas, taking the impoverished and moving them to America so that they can perform as low wage and or slave labor and be exploited for their political power. That is exactly what this movie is illustrating. And we just pretend that all of it, these are the good people. The slaves are the good people. The Irish immigrants are all the good people. And truth be told, they might well be good people who are just in a situation that is not of their own making. But the point is that the exploitation is the same, and all of it works to the detriment of the people, of the native people of those populations.
Yeah, it's well laid out, and I think that last point you made about these immigrants being good people. If you apply this to the modern situation that's going on with the southern border, especially that's obviously the one that's getting the most attention these days for good reason, and you take out the MS-13, the criminal elements. There's obviously cartels. There's organized crime. There's all sorts of trafficking coming across that border. But the bulk of humanity that's actually crossing that border, they're technically criminals because they're obviously part of an invasion into a different country, but they're mostly people who are actually fleeing horrible situations, like you said. That's the irony, and this movie has so many layers of the Hegel. This is one of the most obvious and layered examples of the Hegelian dialectic we talk about so often. That's just a problem, reaction, solution framework that the deep state, the Prussians, have specialized in for all of recorded history, as far as we're aware. The genius of that Hegelian dialectic is that when you get a thing like the current border situation, the most effective deployments of the Hegelian dialectic is when you can have an SJW protesting on a Columbia University campus talking about how Colombians are being displaced due to the overreach and corruption of government officials and how we need to give them asylum because of that. They can be correct at what is happening, but completely miss the source or the seeding of that problem in the first place. Those are the most effective deployments by the enemy, and that's where you can see it here, right? The Irish are getting off the ship. The Irish are there trying to make their own way because they're desperate. So it's every man for himself, every family for themselves. They're here seeking opportunity. All of that is true. They are here seeking opportunity. It isn't their fault what's happened to them in Ireland. But again, what they miss is the very system that is handing them basically voting cards, IDs. It was hilarious to see them, even to the point of going to a table and the guy is offering them, like, this is your license, this is your war conscription, or this is your voting license, this is your war conscription, pick one. Basically, if you do this one, you get some land after the war. If you do this one, then like you get some clothes and a rifle and you get an apartment. And it's just that now they're coming over the border, and Americans think it's completely insane, because it is insane, that it's just like, yeah, come in. They give you a packet of information. They tell you to go to your local DMV, because most states you just need a license. They will grant you a license now as an illegal, and if you have a license, you can go vote. This is just the way it works. It's in this movie, I think it's so cartoonish and old-timey-wimey that we're like, oh, wouldn't it be crazy if that's the way things actually happened? Like, immigrants just come in and they just hand them citizenship and tell them to go vote for a specific guy, and then you see that that's exactly what they are still doing now. But again, the point was, the people that are in these immigrant lines, what they're not recognizing is that the system that is handing them those voting cards and licenses at the border is the same system that has burned their country down behind them. They set the fire in the woods behind them. They drove them out like vermin. And then they're waiting for them on the other side of the field to offer them absolution. If only you take care of these malcontents, these nationalists that are in this nation that are making it difficult. And one of the notes I'd written down is, you get the impression that the Prussians, the deep state, they know that there's a certain amount of time, probably measured in a couple of generations, where they can sort of subjugate a nationalist class or a sovereign class before populist sentiment starts bubbling. And when that starts happening, boom, asymmetric war, new invasion, new sovereign class. You've got yourself another 2 or 3 generations of stable dictatorship, administrative state, before you have to do it all over again.
Indeed. And, you know, we are watching. Trump went down to, or I'm sorry, Mike Johnson went down to Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago to appear with Donald Trump and announce that they were putting forward a bill to outlaw the voting of illegal aliens, something that everybody already believes to be outlawed, something everybody believes could never happen. Now, from our perspective, we are told, and I don't mean just from Trump supporters' perspectives, I just mean from the perspective of any American who believes that illegal immigrants, illegal aliens are not voting in our elections. We all agree that that's how it should be, or at least probably 95% of people. There is a portion of the Democrat Party who believes that because illegal aliens are paying sales taxes in our country, that they should be allowed to vote. That is the argument. Well, they're contributing to our country. They're providing their labor, and they're doing things like paying sales tax, and they're paying into Social Security, even though they can never take anything out. Well, what? Okay. You just go with it, right?
Yeah.
So they're supposed to maybe be able to vote. Now, if they keep that effort up for 20 years, and, I described the illegal alien program, which is a program. It's UN migration. There's NGOs set up on both ends, recruiting people to come here and then bringing them here and then placing them in jobs, often with transnational corporations. They are essentially performing slave labor. They don't have the option of getting out of it. They owe people money for bringing them here in the first place. They have family that they want to bring in. They have these other priorities, so they can't go anywhere. They're essentially slave labor. And if we continue to attempt to keep them from voting over 5 years, over 10 years, over 20 years, it'll eventually be only that we don't want them to vote because we are racist. We're already told we don't want illegal aliens being brought here by the million because we are racist. And that is what this displays as well. But it is obviously a systematic approach to stealing elections by bringing in foreigners, happening right now. Let's take a break. Guys, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up if you are on Rumble and you like the show. I mean, if you don't like the show, you definitely don't have to hit thumbs up.
Scram, get out of here.
Well, also that, why are you watching it if you don't like it? But I would never ask you to do anything that would violate your conscience, like hitting the like button if it wasn't something that you liked. Okay, so a word from our friends at River. Guys, are you ready to diversify your assets with Bitcoin? We are introducing River, the official Bitcoin partner of Badlands Media, where you can navigate the world of Bitcoin with confidence. With River, you can buy Bitcoin like a pro. With the assurance of being licensed and regulated right here in the United States, River ensures your Bitcoin journey is smooth and secure with on-demand live support at your fingertips. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/river to create your River account today. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. River, shaping the future of finance, one Bitcoin at a time. All right. So I told you I had another historical surprise from my my research into all of the events portrayed in this movie. I finished this last night and could not believe my eyes. And so I'm going to play this with no sound in the background. This is the scene of the draft day riots, the draft riots in New York. There was a draft week where they were going to let the people of New York know which ones of them had to go off to war. And the requirements were, or the only way to get out of it, I should say, is if you were willing to pay $300, which is not something that immigrants or the common folk were able to do. It was primarily something that the quote unquote elites were able to do. Their sons did not have to be conscripted and sent off to this war, a war that many of the American people did not support at all, despite the fact that we are told about the Union. And we are led to believe that everyone in the South, everyone involved with the Confederacy, had those political views only to support the institution of slavery, which was quite obviously complete and total bullshit. Okay, so let's get into these draft riots. The crazy part is that at the end of this, what we see is naval ships firing their cannons upon the people of New York, just destroying this 5 Points area. And there are outlets that say that part of this film is not accurately portrayed. Naval ships never fired on New York City. But then you can get into, let me pull up. I'm going to pause this scene where we are and go to this article right here. Now, we don't have to concern ourselves with the source of this article because this article links to its sources. And we can come right down here and hopefully that is very visible. It is clear. Wait, where are we here? Okay. It is clear that Union infantry and cavalry engaged the rioters in the streets, contributing to the substantial loss of life. It is also true that cannons, some on land, some on naval vessels, were deployed. The artillery on land was indeed used, but it is unclear whether there was also a bombardment from sea.
Oh,
Okay?
They only shot cannonballs at them from the hills, Chris, not
right,
not
exactly.
the water.
Exactly.
Snopes
So we have-
1850 style.
Totally. So we have Columbia University talking about Union cavalry and artillery set up in Gramercy Park and firing on American citizens. And we have the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable. These are and Baruch College. These are the other sources. 2 warships were dispatched from the Brooklyn Naval Yard, their cannon covering the lower end of Manhattan. By the 4th day, New York City resorted to extreme measures by firing cannons at the angry mobs. So the American military was directly targeting the American people because they didn't want to go to war
Against
on
Americans.
behalf of the Union against Americans. What does it mean if the American people don't want to go to a war that the American government is waging? Well, that means that the American government is not representing the American people. What does it mean if they want to go to war so bad against their own citizens that they have to bring in former slaves and mass immigrant populations in order to be able to wage that war? All of that is bad enough, but wait, there's more. So I thought, wow, strange timing. And what a strange location. This 5 Points area is below Canal Street. It is at the southern tip, essentially, of Manhattan Island, not all the way down, but most of the way down. And so I think about what is down in lower Manhattan now. Is there any reason why the government and why New York City would want to just demolish everything that's down there and make it unlivable for the people down there? And I thought, there is like this very famous area in New York City in lower Manhattan. What could it be that they were trying to set up? And I thought, oh yeah, what about the New York Stock Exchange? Could it be that? And I begin going through the history right here, where it says several locations were used between 1817 and 1865 when the present location was adopted. How about that? The present location of the New York Stock Exchange was adopted in 1865, just 2 years after this draft riot.
It's unbelievable. I mean,
it's
unbelievably believable. It's really sobering. You know, it's when you're looking into any kind of history. I know Ghost is in the chat. Obviously, he's a historian himself. History is all blood, right? It's you almost get desensitized because you're just reading about atrocities. Basically, that's the stuff that makes the historical record, whether they're real or fake, or some mix of the two. This one, though, I think because of the analogs to what's going on right now, you always use the term reruns. Often we talk about mirrored narratives and, again, war of stories that I'll never stop talking about. And this is the why to me. This is the why on both ends. What you just went through there, cannons, American cannons, ripping American citizens apart because they won't go to war to kill each other on behalf of the administrative state, also known as the Prussians. It's disgusting, obviously. It's sobering. And when I say it's the why of the establishment, the Prussians, the winning side, being so obsessed with storytelling and control of the narrative. And it's the why of why people like us are so obsessed with exposing the narrative. And people like there's sometimes people that are just, I mean, in our friends and families and even just people supposedly in the info war, and they wonder why you go back through this kind of stuff. And they wonder why you get so obsessed with it. Look at how this should be an event, a travesty, and an act of terror on the American people that should be arguably the most infamous event in the history of the United States. And I didn't know about it. Yeah. Right? Like, I'm a little ashamed I didn't know about it.
Me too.
But I also went through the Prussian education system, right? And we've defected a lot from that. What's weirdly exciting, if I want to turn this into a white pill that I want to do at times, what's weirdly exciting about this is that the more you kind of figure out, the more you realize you don't know. And I actually think that's a good thing, because just finding this thread here, this seismic event that we didn't know about, it reorders everything that comes after it. Once you, like I said with the puzzle piece, once you flip that puzzle piece around, every other piece, it's like a little mechanism, a gear in a safe, an impossibly complex safe that is the American story that we've been sold over the last 150 odd years. It reorders everything that goes after it. And that's exciting, because the further you go back, if you can change that, you can turn that knob, you can change that cog, you can start to figure out what's actually been going on. And I was going to make one more point here, is that another thing that I find sobering and kind of disturbing about this is that when you look at one of the notes I'd written down was about the narratives that were being told to Americans at that time, right? That they had the
hold that thought, keep your note. Let me add one more layer onto what we just discussed historically, at least. All of that devastation caused directly against American citizens. So there was a civil war happening in New York, essentially. That was all excused because of the riots. The fact that the riots were happening was what allowed the government to apply that level of force. And that is why they instigate these events. And, you know, we had a conversation about the Civil War movie at GART. This is how these things happen. They instigate, they make they destabilize as much as they can. They provoke a response. Then they insert the agents provocateurs to make everything violent. The mob then goes along with the violence because now the sides are drawn. So you got to defend your side. Then you're interacting. The interplay is between the people and the government at that point, because the government is there to enact state force against the people to subdue the riots and restore order. And then no matter what the government does after that is excusable. And they can say, well, you know, we made some mistakes. There were some errors in judgment. I guess we missed a few times and misfired a few times. You know, we really should. We promised to never shoot American citizens with cannons from the water ever again.
Right.
But it all goes away because of the riots. And we can see that stuff being sparked up again.
That it's exactly parallel to what I was thinking is, again, the narratives that these people at the time were being told. It's a direct mirror to today. And the disturbing part about it, and the reason it's so important for us to point it out as it's going on now, as you say, with protests. I mean, look at what we've got right now. Yep. We've got protests going on at universities. We've got protests going on. The ones that are not getting a lot of Con Inc. attention because they're not as mimetic are the ones where they're crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. They're in New York. They've got no relation to, seemingly, to the protests that are going on at these various American universities, which is all, the Daily Wire wants to talk to you about, because look at how stupid the liberals are. Let's own the libs. Where when you watch a movie like this and when you look into that history that you just pulled up, that's the dark underbelly of we always talk about mandate, right? And a lot of times we're talking about mandate from the side of American sovereignty, the America First movement, elections, patriot plans. The other side knows about mandate too, right? And like you just laid out, they just need the mandate to fire on a crowd. And that's what they wanted on J6 too. That's what they want coming up. They want to pave the way narratively in a mass psychological manner using narrative warfare for the use of extreme force on American citizens. They want to do this, and if they can get that going, then one of the things I'd written in my notes is this idea of a perpetual engine. It's like this perpetual violence engine. All they need, they actually say it in the movie a couple times, all you need is a spark, and that goes both ways. So once the first cannonball is fired, once the first bullet is fired, then you've got the real version of the chaotic unrest and war scenario, kinetic back and forth, that you wanted. It no longer matters what happened there. A smaller version of this that actually happened, 100 years before this, 70 years before this or whatever, was the Boston Massacre, which I don't know if all Americans are taught about that quite as much, but I remember digging into that a lot because I grew up in Boston. And that was a smaller scenario, but very similar, where you had warring, you can actually find news clippings of what was being told to the British population and what was being told to the, what the Adams were disseminating to local Bostonians about what had happened there, where you had a group of redcoats with rifles or muskets, and you had a large mob of Bostonians that were gathered around them. And of course, just like the shot that was heard around the world in Lexington, nobody knows if a Bostonian attacked the soldiers or if the soldiers attacked a Bostonian. But what happened was the British fired on the crowd and killed, I think, 3 men. And that sparked everything that was to follow. So while the British were trying to reframe that at the time, the empire, of saying, well, they were being threatened, right? Let's just take them at their word and say that those British soldiers were being threatened by Bostonians. They're leaving aside the very premise that these Bostonians had their city occupied by an armed militant force that was enforcing power projection and the threat of violence over them. So even if they were violent first, they were being threatened. It's like in this scenario that you pulled up, if you've got the government putting cannons on a hill, and then Bill the Butcher attacks the other side, he's the one who started the violence when he's got cannons pointed at him. So it shows you why it's so important. And another white pill is that we're cutting these narratives off too early now. And you can see that back in this day, there was no way to do that. The informational control information was so slow that they could craft entire narratives and deploy them in such a controlled manner and so siloed from other segments of the country, never mind the world, that it was a lot easier in those days for them to create the story they wanted and then codify it into the history that we were taught.
Yeah. Again, 100% on board with all that. And to add on, I played half of the Bill the Butcher monologue, and I missed a section that I think is really important and makes a great point. So I want to pull that up right now because there's about a minute here that is really amazing. So I'm gonna take us out when I put this up. But yeah, have a listen here because he explains a societal phenomenon that we are all extremely familiar with at this point. Up, and I blew it with the sound. Give me 1 second here. Just
at least it's got subtitles.
I suppose that would have helped, but I already ruined it by bringing it up. There we go.
You know how I stayed alive this long? All these years. Fear. A spectacle of fearsome acts. Somebody steals from me, I cut off his hands. He offends me, I cut out his tongue. He rises against me. I cut off his head, stick it on a pike. Raise it high up so all in the streets can see. That's what preserves the order of things.
I mean, that is just a hell of a line, perfectly delivered because Daniel Day-Lewis is an incredible actor. But consider the meaning of that. That is what we have been dealing with nonstop for 4 years, and truthfully, far longer. Public displays of fear, that is what preserves the order of things.
But yeah, one of my one of the pieces I had written last year that people liked the most, which surprised me, was the Mind Killer, related to Dune, which we obviously did last week. But this is the same concept, right? These are universal first principles. They've been first principles that have largely been wielded against us, and fear is the main one. It's the engine. It is the core engine of how everything is accomplished. It is what animates the stories. It animates. It triggers the public buy-in to the story that's being told. You can cite any study you want to, but you don't even have to. You just understand what it feels like to be a human being that experiences fear, that experiences anger, that experiences the emotions that we do. And you can see right in front of you, especially with the benefit of hindsight, how things like Vietnam to 9/11, on and on and on, are used to get us into any modern version of the Hegelian dialectic. Same thing at this time. It's the dastardly Southerners. We've got to get them. They're enslaving people. They're evil. They want to subjugate everybody. We need Big Daddy government to come in and stop them. It's animated through fear. That's nothing new under the sun. It's the core premise. One of the things that's disappointed a lot of us in the last 6 to 9 months is the fact that a community that calls itself the truth community, that many of us have woken up to this reality of being programmed through fear. The next scary thing that happens, a huge portion of awakened people immediately react emotionally to whatever's going on. And you don't have to play the opposite game. Sometimes people think, okay, well, yeah, you're just playing the opposite game. You're taking the opposite stance. That's not what it's about. It's about defecting from the emotional reaction to what's going on. And what we often do is look at the narrative intent of the storytellers. Who is telling you the story? What do they want you to feel about the story? One of my other notes I'd written down in relation to this movie is, again, as I said at the beginning of the show, even if we accept that the events that we are being told about factually occurred, the stories we are then told about those events can completely invert the meaning. And that's exactly wrapped up in the character of Bill the Butcher. The way he is presented is clearly as a megalomaniac, nationalist, bad, violent, extremist, racist, again, populist, nationalist, all the things they call Donald Trump, when really he just sees the game for what it is. He knows what the other side is doing. He knows what the administrative state is. As you said earlier in the show, he's done deals with these criminals, so he knows how they operate. But the modern framing of this movie, the storytelling, is meant to cast him as a villain. And that's what they do in the modern day. When they can't refute a story, when they can't refute the America First and MAGA story, which was essentially the pitch of MAGA, is make America great again, right? Build a wall, make America great again. It's a pretty hard story to subvert or turn around. So what they do is they go after the storyteller. They don't go after the story. They can't tell you that making America great is bad. So they go after the people telling you the story, and they invert everything that you can see about this person, which Donald Trump is obviously the modern analog to this. You can imagine in 150 years from now, if we lose in this era, them making a movie and Donald Trump would be the new Daniel Day-Lewis, Bill the Butcher. They would just reframe it in this era. He's the new Hitler. And that's why it's so important to catch it while they're doing it in real time.
Exactly. I mean, I did a long segment on my show yesterday about exactly that. They are trying to turn Donald Trump into Hitler. I think that the point I was making was that there was a purpose. There was a reason why on the same morning we had the article about people in Washington preparing to flee the country so that they don't get prosecuted and don't have to participate in the prosecutions of their allies. They don't want anything to do with these investigations. They are going to leave the country behind. They are the great patriots who want to protect our democracy, but they are going to leave the country behind rather than face accountability. At the same time, we're hearing about Donald Trump deporting 20 million illegal aliens because they're going to conflate those things. Because in both cases, Donald Trump and MAGA extremists are forcing people to leave. And what we're talking about are illegal aliens and people who have committed crimes against the country that they do not want to face accountability for. And Donald Trump, for doing that, will be Hitler. That is what they are going to portray. They're seeding that narrative, I mean, every day and night at this point. We do have to pause for a second for a word from Benson. Guys, also, please hit that thumbs up if you like the show. We already went through this. Just do it.
Yeah, just
All
do
right.
it.
Benson Honey Farms.
All right, Badlanders love Benson Honey Farms. Mrs. Bright actually 2 days ago, no, was it yesterday? Yes, made the now famous buffalo hot sauce mixed with Benson Honey Farms. Heat that stuff up over a stove. That's a pro tip. Put it on some breaded chicken. It's scrumptious, dare I say. As is Benson, just straight out of the jar. I don't know if it's partially responsible for helping me with my seasonal allergies, but I think it is. Indulge in the authentic, unpasteurized, 100% natural honey, product of diligent, probably union bees, admittedly, working the fields of wildflowers. It's as raw and robust as the spirit of Badlands. And don't forget to try the goat's milk honey soap, which I actually worked into a fine, bright lather right before showtime, which is why I look so svelte right now. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/honey. Tell them we sent you, and stop being a disappointment to everybody, and eat some honey.
Stop being a disappointment. That's a good
You
one.
think they can't get weirder, but they can.
I really like that one. Very quickly, Tattooed Teacher in the chat earlier said, right in that neighborhood is the Museum of Native Americans. It's a federal building, archives, library, exhibits.
There's that on that note. That's a great call out there. But this movie, I mentioned it about the very end of it with these, the graves on the hillside.
Mhm.
This movie felt to me like a humiliation ritual about these Native Americans, about populists, basically populist nationalists. I think sometimes the predictive programming and humiliation ritual rhetoric gets thrown at everything in this community because we're kind of like PTSD. We think everything that's ever been made is humiliation ritual. But this one, I really felt it. I almost felt like the cynicism and the hunger and desire to stamp out populist rhetoric and sentiment and to make sure that the American people do not grab onto it, don't feel any of that, don't cultivate any nationalist kind of spirit. This is one of the key things that Hollywood has aligned themselves against. I mean, even this week, I don't know how he still goes viral these days, but Robert De Niro, had some sit down for some reason. And it's the same thing, right? It's basically the exact same narrative intent. You can see Scorsese doing it in this, or, whoever wrote the script. It's just stamp out anything that is populist, make it seem like they're just demonizing the quote unquote other. And that's where all of our problems lie, right? All of America's problems doesn't have to do with the administrative state, with the government, with Prussians, with the Hegelian dialectic. It's just Americans are racist and they've always been racist. Actually, on that note, one thing I did think was funny is that when you go back into the 1800s and you start watching movies from that era or reading histories from that era, you realize that at that time, white people weren't all considered the same thing, like you mentioned with Irish people, right? But now we're all the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Chris is a filthy Italian. I'm a filthy Irishman. But these days, we're the exact same thing. We are a monolith of white men. And every other culture that is not white are varied and diverse and unique. But in the 1800s, it's funny because they're allowed to portray that there was different kinds of white people. It's just that not anymore.
Well, yeah. And, also Jewish people used to be white and now they're not white anymore, which is right. So weird. And I feel like eventually, like we Italians are going to be black again. Yeah. I mean,
you already are to me.
Thanks, I guess. Okay, so there's a couple unbelievable quotes about politics in this film. Of course, they went through, it's not the actual ballots that matter. It's the ballot count.
Yeah.
Like you just have to report the right number, and that's the number. These were Democrats stealing these elections back then. This is just what they do. It's what they've always done. It's not some mystery what happened in 2020. Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes. At one point, Boss Tweed says, the thing about poor people is you can always pay half of them to kill the other half.
Yep. I mean, it's so on the nose. It's insulting and funny. Just how in your face it is.
It is so in your face. He also earlier in the film said the appearance of the law must be upheld. And so what they wanted was the police to go out and seem like they're doing their job. You can't use the gangs against the police because that would diminish the image of the police in the public eye. And the police have to look authoritative. Otherwise, the elites won't feel safe, and there will be no threat that anyone actually has to follow the rules. The rules are known by everyone to be bullshit. And, you can read Lysander Spooner, which is someone I was reading a month or so ago, writing in the Civil War era, just treating it as an obvious fact about reality that many people in the country, if not most people in the country, totally disregard the Constitution because the Constitution has no authority. No one living ever voted for it. That was his point. And you couldn't even prove that anyone voted for it back then. So there's that aspect, but the illusion of the law is what is important. It is all an image maintained through fear, and they're operating the exact same regime playbook over and over again in different countries around the world on slightly different timelines with slightly different variations. It has always been the same system of compromise and corruption, and this goes back 2,000 years.
Yeah, and the kind of dark reality there, the dark truth is that they're right. Even when you're talking about the Constitution, they're very literally right in terms of, again, public mandate is what animates these laws. It's what codifies them. We talk often about how a judge's decision codifies something in a legal record, but it doesn't codify something as having real effects or power projection unless there is a system in place to project power onto said decision, or unless the American people or the populace agrees with that decision. You often talk about consent through compliance. We saw this a lot during the COVID era. It wasn't legal for them to do X, Y, or Z. Well, they did it. They did it because they got the illusion of public mandate. And to get the illusion of public mandate, it turns out that, as you said, it's consent through compliance. You don't necessarily see. I often say this from the opposite framing in a positive way about the awakening. You don't need enemy psychological combatants to adopt your paradigm or your point of view to win a mind war. You just need to get them to defect from the mind war. And that's what the enemy has known for a long time. You don't need to convince everybody to mask up or vax up. You just need to cow them into not resisting your forced conscription of others to do the same. And then the useful idiots will police themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And going on what you were just saying, I was watching this documentary by Aaron Russo called Freedom to Fascism, which is about the illegality of the federal income tax. And the explanation given by the government in that film is explicitly they have gone to the courts and gotten court decisions. And because those court decisions uphold their actions, because they've never been challenged all the way, that is the law that has been created that allows them to function and allows them to convince people that they actually owe a federal income tax. All of this is simply court precedent through bad decisions over time. It's not that it's constitutional. They don't care that it's constitutional. They don't even care that the laws don't exist. They just care that the courts uphold their position when it's challenged, and that's enough for them because everybody else just complies. It's
absolutely
the way our society has functioned for a very long time, obviously, maybe the entire time, is not at all how it was described to us. What we believe is our birthright is not something that we have in any form whatsoever. And most people aren't even willing to stand up and speak the fact that they want it, because many of them don't want it. Not most people. I don't want to say most. And I really am optimistic and hopeful that we are way over 50% in terms of people who actually want to live as sovereign individuals and take responsibility over their own lives. Because the truth is, we need each other. People are able to do certain things. Other people can do other things. And it is through that interplay of people's various talents and skills and drives and ambitions that we have a culture and a society. It doesn't have to be implemented from the top down, where we just follow rules and get in where we fit into the regime's larger program. You know, we have to be able to be sovereign individuals if we want to have that free society. Hopefully people are waking up to that, but most people are just still prepared. Not most people. I already said that by mistake. Many people are prepared to just remain as subjects of a thoroughly illegitimate regime, following laws that don't make any sense and are not constitutional. They just go along to get along. And we'll see whether, you know, how much of that the people are honestly willing to take, I suppose.
And this is why, you know, it's not us being masochists or anything when we talk about we as you know, truth community people, whatever, anons, etc., often talk about pain, the sifting process, the one-way filtration, you know, pain being a key mechanism of that. If fear has been an animator and a core engine that powers the enemy's Hegelian dialectic, one of my kind of core theories has been that patriots are utilizing a reverse Hegelian dialectic. They're essentially they're reverse engineering that that synthesis, thesis, synthesis, antithesis, whatever dialectic on the deep state. And pain is the engine of awakening. You know, hopefully that pain, we can come through it. I think the COVID era was part of that. It actually made me think of a clip, you know, regarding when we're talking about finances and all of that. If you want to share my screen here, I don't know how many people saw this, but this was Bernstein here. He is, what is his official role?
I think he's a financial advisor to Joe Biden.
Right, financial advisor to Joe Biden.
Economic
this is him. This went viral even in the normie internet about this is how our people supposedly in charge, the adults in the room, talk about why they're able to print money and why we still have to pay taxes.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, I mean, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean,
I mean, you get the idea, right? Yeah. Like that is one of the more dystopian clips you will see, where it's essentially, and by the way, that woman is not to be hero worshipped. Her conclusion, this is the irony. She has seen the falsity of the U.S. monetary system, so her solution is print unlimited money and use modern monetary theory, because she found out, she's the first one who found this out, guys. She found out the government prints money, but they also tax it, which led her to ask, well, wait a second. If you're printing the money, how come you're taxing the money too? Why don't you just print more of it? And instead of coming to the conclusion that they're criminals that are subjugating us through taxation and printing whatever they need to print anyway, she thinks we should do more of that. We should go further into that system of falsity in order to pull itself out of it. It's basically the monetary equivalent of shoving your head so far up your own ass, you come back out of your mouth, and as if you've solved our monetary issues, when the real way to look at these things might be to take a first principles approach and maybe not let people who just create laws out of nothing with no mandate to do so do this stuff. So like you said, if we want to be it's easy to be pessimistic about this stuff, but I'm optimistic that a clip like that has gone so viral, even in the normie internet. I even played one on Cultural Heretics last week of a young Canadian girl, like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, who is holding up Canadian dollars and saying, why is this $100 one? Why can't we just print more of these? The government always does it. Why is there inflation? Just deflate it, she says. And it's like, that's perfect. She's kind of right. She's almost there. We just need people to get a little bit further.
That's funny. And yeah, I mean, this documentary, that I haven't watched yet, but what I've read, it's actually pro modern monetary.
Yes, it is.
They want more of this stuff. And you almost think, okay, well, we might believe that a lot of things are under control of people who aren't visibly in control of things, right?
Yeah.
And so you can play that out and it's nice to have some sort of limiting principle for any belief that you're going to adopt, especially one like that is admittedly very difficult to prove to an outsider who doesn't have a pretty thorough understanding of exactly what it is we're saying. And we understand that is a problem for us.
Mm-hmm.
You look at something like that effort, and you think, wow, is this like set up to red pill people to our position? Because this isn't going to convince anybody. This is only going to convince people that these people are insane and that the whole system is about to collapse. And then I go today through through an article on my show by Ann Applebaum, who's talking about how China and Russia are winning the propaganda war, the information war. And she goes through step by step and describes each and every part of the censorship and propaganda apparatus in this country that is being used against American citizens to control the conversation in a way that will only benefit the regime. She goes through each and every step of it and blames it on Russia and China. The entire time she talks about how bad all of this stuff is when they do it and how good the organizations doing it for us are, because they need to protect our democracy from the influence of censorship and propaganda from China and Russia. And the only way they're able to do it is by censoring us and propagandizing us.
Yeah, it's funny.
I've mentioned it's fake, but it's not.
I've mentioned anecdotally, like at my day job, I've got a boss who's like a regime follower type of thing, and that's somebody who fancies himself. We've seen these people who fancy themselves highly educated. Well, they are highly educated, whatever that means. But it's funny when you start just employing the Socratic method with them and just ask them very simple questions. For example, if you showed a normie that clip of Bernstein talking about how he can't really answer the question of why the U.S. doesn't just keep printing more money to bail itself out of its own debt. You know what the obvious question to ask a normie is, who's in favor of the regime? Who is the United States in debt to? Because it's not something the media talks about, right? They're just like, a normie sees the U.S. government as a monolithic god. They're the new gods, right? That's what they're basically their substitute for God. Somebody up there's a faith-based approach. Some sort of system, a group of experts created this system, and that's what we have right now. So then you'd ask that person, okay, so that's the highest of high, right? The government. That is the highest you can get of expertdom. Who are those people in debt to? And then you'd have to then educate them that the Federal Reserve is a private institution. Well, what power projection, what source of power projection could a private company have over the most powerful nation, we are told, in the world, or the most powerful government? And it's like, these are these Socratic questions that maybe get some normies to start thinking, or just create enough cognitive dissonance to get them not to be able to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, that is a question that I spend a lot of time thinking about now. Again, as I was saying before, when you realize that the news is fake now and it's designed specifically to manipulate human behavior, and you apply that to the future and the past, you run into some pretty weird answers. And then, it's really hard to find where the inversion stops. And the truth is, that it doesn't stop. This is what they do. They convince us that the exact opposite of reality is in fact true and has always been true and will always be true, so that we are all totally disoriented about everything that matters in our world. And then we have their layer that they set up that everyone is interacting with, so we are forced to interact with it as well. And so part of that layer is the understanding that the United States is the most powerful nation that has ever existed in world history. We are also the freest nation and the best nation. And it just so happens that we are essentially a nation of debt slaves to central bankers who operate as the formerly manufacturing center of the world that is now shifting, or was intended to shift, to China. We are the world's police force, going and enforcing whatever claims on whatever countries and colonies around the world the global regime wants to place. That has always been the job of the U.S. military. It is backed by American blood and treasure. And we are basically all consigned to working in that system forever as they extend the indentured servitude of us and our progeny for generations to come, so that they can continue implementing their plan of global domination. That is what the real world is. And, we go back and we say, oh, well, we have the best system because our founders prepared us the best constitution ever. And they might have prepared us a fine constitution. It also might not be the best constitution ever, because we can see that it's been overthrown and abused and inverted to the detriment of the very people it's meant to protect. So, we have to be able to go back and examine these things.
And it didn't take too long, in the scheme of things. One of the first notes I had written down actually when watching this movie was the idea of reality creation. That's often how I frame the intent of the War of Stories. The intent of the War of Stories is to perpetuate and create new accepted layers of reality, what you might refer to as the false reality. So the stories are the engines through which that occurs. And one thing that kind of struck me during this, not only from the portrayal of the first scene to when DiCaprio's character Amsterdam is, 15 years older or so, but then thinking of myself observing this in 2024, and then you're looking into the histories just 150, 170 years ago. It's not that long. I was struck by just the epiphany that it doesn't take long. It does not take long for them to completely rewrite the understanding of history. I had heard this said in a different context over the weekend, and I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of historical context. But somebody said the line, "How many of you know your grandfather's grandfather's name?"
I heard that too. What was that from?
I don't know.
I think it was maybe was it in Gangs of New York?
Maybe it was.
What was that?
Maybe it was in Gangs of New York. I'm not entirely sure, but that line struck me because it's not that long. It's not that long, right?
I don't know my grandfather's grandfather's name.
I have no idea. And I bet
that makes me sad.
Right. And I think what was eye-opening to me is that this is the human condition. We're focused on what's directly behind and what's directly ahead. That's the fear response. That's survival instincts. We think of stories the same way. You can see the power of stories, the good power of stories that can be inverted, is that stories, I think, allow us to break from that instinctual human framing of looking at your parents and grandparents and then looking at your children and your grandchildren. That's how humans are kind of coded to think. This is my progeny and their progeny. I'm my parents' progeny and theirs before them. You don't think beyond that. You do not think one step further. You don't think any steps after your grandchildren. And that's what history is for. And that's why history is so powerful. But if you think of that 5 steps, essentially 2 steps out on either direction in the timeline, that is not a long time. That's 100 years right there. That's 80 to 100 years. And it just shows you. So when you're looking at it, on the one hand, I was struck watching this movie thinking 150, 170 years isn't that long ago. But in the span of human perception and memory, collective memory, it is huge. I mean, it's an endless chasm. It might as well be 2,000 years ago for how much we know about that, even in our own lives and family experiences.
Yeah, man. Okay, so we have to start wrapping up. I also want to note to people that at one point, the Cameron Diaz character pulled out a map showing that they were going to sail all the way around from New York, all the way down around the very tip of South America and back up to San Francisco. And the ocean they were going to begin their journey in was called the Western Ocean, not the Atlantic Ocean. So you got to wonder when that sort of thing would have changed. Guys, also
Middle Earth map might be accurate. Who knows?
If you want to support Badlands, if you want to donate to support one of the shows and you aren't watching live on Rumble and able to give a Rumble rant, go to badlandsmedia.tv/boost and you can do it over there. We also have the Badlands shop. If you want Badlands merch, you can become a Badlander, which is kind of like our street team. And all of that is a great way to support Badlands Media. Please, as I said earlier, hit the thumbs up. I think we have some Rumble rants. I don't know if you checked the boosts. And
we're caught up on boosts. If
Okay.
anybody watches on replay, you're welcome to leave a boost that we will grab next week. Appreciate that. We have Emily30, who sent $5 over, said, "Isn't Billy the Butcher a character on the Amazon show The Boys? I see what they did there." I saw this rant come through earlier in the show. You are correct, Emily, and that is a good call. I wonder if there's something to that.
Yeah,
It's
we're gonna
a
have to look at
chaotic character played by Carl Urban who kills superheroes. So it's quite interesting. And then Howard76 sent a 50 over and said, "Such a terrific analysis of history, contemporary film, and today's events. Salutes to you, me boys, and the dead you, me boys, and the dead rabbits. But may we all awaken by this presentation." With the new dead rabbits. I love
Very
it.
nicely done.
Yeah, the gang names could have used some work, I think, at this time.
Well,
we
hey,
could've.
man. I mean, I'm sure that they wouldn't be overly impressed with Crips and Bloods and MS-13.
Yeah. Actually, imagine how I was thinking about that earlier.
No offense, guys.
Imagine
No
how-
offense. Don't kill me.
Right. Imagine how they would do against Billy the Butcher and those boys. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I just gangs have fallen so far.
All right. So, guys, Eye of the Storm is up next. So stay tuned to Badlands Media for that. And Burning Bright, you have a film selection for next week, I hope.
I do. It's a strange one. I want to share my screen here.
Sure do.
We're tripping out. We're watching 1984's The Never-Ending Story.
Oh gosh.
Next week. It is bizarre, but I want to watch this for a few reasons. For one, I want a jolt. I want some grade A heroin nostalgia just
Okay.
injected directly into me. I want to see if I can get through the Artex scene in the swamps of sadness this time, as I could never get through that as a kid. But in all seriousness, when we're talking about reality creation, this movie, I kind of love the portrayal of it. The villain is the nothing. It's a framed narrative of a story within a story within a story. I think there's a lot of actually pretty cool stuff in this movie. And I especially like that it might be kind of some of the disturbing elements of it make me wonder if there was more symbolism going on here regarding sort of dark forces in our world and the threat to the innocence of children. So anyway, looking
All
forward
right.
to revisiting it. It's a weird one, but it's
I think
good.
I think I watched it like 10 years ago and was like, what in the world is this? So
Yep.
maybe now I'll have a totally different viewpoint on it, which will be
Yeah.
fun.
If you partake in any sort of legal psychedelics, I mean, go for it.
All right. All right, everybody. On that note, we will bid you adieu. Thank you so very much for watching, and we will see you next week for a never-ending story.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.